Welcome to Formosa Dream Chasers.
We're your hosts, Mary Ann
and Qing'en.
Please join us as we explore the journeys amazing people take in pursuit of their dreams.
And get insights from their experiences.
Let's hit the road.
And get started.
Hello and welcome everyone to Formosa Dream Chasers. The Taiwan International Human Rights Film Festival 2024 kicked off last month. Our coming episodes, including the one today, will feature special guests who are part of the festival, so we'll be putting a spotlight on human rights and their work.
The Taiwan International Human Rights Film Festival, organized by the National Human Rights Museum under the Cultural Ministry, was established in 2017 to promote human rights education and has become a significant platform for dialogue and collaboration on human rights issues. This year, the festival is co-curated by feminist scholar Fan Qing and the renowned Taiwanese filmmaker Hong Hong, and features 10 exceptional films that explore contemporary women's conditions, human rights in wartime, historical justice, decolonization, and ethnic identity.
The festival features two main sections, one focused on gender equality and the other titled Human Rights Lens, which examines themes of hatred and forgiveness. This year's Human Rights Lens program showcases films that reveal the harsh realities of state violence and the suffering individuals face during war and conflict. A notable selection from this section is the documentary I Shall Not Hate, directed by Tal Barda.
According to the organizers' press release, the screening of I Shall Not Hate aims to provide context for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict while highlighting the experiences of its victims, in particular that of Dr. Izzeldin Abuelaish, who is the main character. The organizers want to promote understanding of global human rights issues through communication and empathy instead of conflict and division. They believe that Dr. Izzeldin's story is a powerful reminder that love and peace can bring hope, even in the darkest times.
We are honored and privileged to be speaking to the winner of Greenhouse Film Program and SEMA Global Impact Media Awards, Director Tal Barda. Welcome, Director Tal Barda, and would you like to say hello to our audience and share a bit about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me here. This is my first time in Taiwan, and I knew I really wanted to get here. I heard a lot about Taiwan and, in fact, the country that fought a lot for democracy, and I felt that it's an amazing place to come and present this film, where people understand that they have the power to really change, and that's also my goal as a filmmaker, to kind of use the medium of documentary and create awareness, but also change mindsets of people and bring inspiration.
Okay, so Director Barda, speaking of the film that you are bringing to Taiwan this time, could you please describe the topics the film tackle in your own words?
Okay, so the film is about Dr. Izzeldin Abuelaish, who's a Nobel Peace Prize nominee and the first doctor that came out of Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. And the film follows his story through and his life in the zone of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, especially also focusing on his, I would say, motivation and journey for peace, that he's actually tested by a very tragic incident that takes place in January 2009 when his 3 daughters and niece are killed by an Israeli tank. He continues fighting for justice, and he continues fighting for dialogue and understanding and against hatred. And for me, that's why I wanted to make this film, because I wanted to focus on someone who, for me, I don't know, people refer to sometimes Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King of the Middle East, and kind of focus on a person that he's kind of rare in the landscape, I would say, of violence and war. And despite all the challenges he went through, he would like to change the fate of his family and his people.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, Director Barda. Your mother is American and your father is French, and we noted that you were born and raised in Jerusalem and you graduated from Tel Aviv University. Having grown up in that area with that kind of background, I did wonder about what narratives you were told about Palestinians because you were there in Israel. Could you share a little bit about this and how your background shaped your view of the Israel-Palestine conflicts?
So it's an interesting and complicated question. I think I was born into like an international family in many ways, and I feel it's like I have kind of like a split identity of where I come from, and maybe that's why I'm also looking into topics where nothing really is black or white. It's more of everything. Not even gray, I would say, all the colors of the rainbow. So for me, growing up, I grew up in a family that were very much peace activists, and my older sister is a human rights lawyer. It was very obvious for me the values of my family that are against racism, against, differentiating between people because of their background or religion or color. But I kind of always avoided, I think, political topics. They were always challenging and complicated and brought a lot of frustration. But this one I couldn't resist, I think. When I saw Dr. Abuelaish's story on TV, like many others did, and I saw the way he talked, I kind of felt that it's not really a political issue here. It's a human and social issue, and I felt it's much bigger than the conflict, which is big as itself. But I feel that the notion of the way he looked at life and what his heart kind of needed to deal with is something that was much greater than that. But yes, I would say that it is complex for me also to create a film like this, and being also Israeli, not just American and French, but being also Israeli, is actually part of my motivation to do this story, because I feel that I wanted to show a story of someone who is called the other side, who people would call the enemy, and break that boundary and break the borders and bring also people around the world, but also in Israel, to be able to see beyond their trauma and grief and be able to see the other side's difficulty. Like I would like also in other countries in the world, people that will be able to look at each other as people, as civilians who are affected by war. And yeah, so for me, the situation is, I'm very clear about my views about, against what is going on and against the war. But for me, this story was, first of all, a human story of a very special person.
To also give some context of the stance of the Israeli government on the wars they are conducting, here's a short clip of Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, when he addressed the UN General Assembly on September 27th.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of the State of Israel. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East. Responsible governments should not only support Israel in rolling back Iran's aggression, they should join Israel. Israel has already made its choice. We've decided to advance the blessing. We're building a partnership for peace with our Arab neighbors while fighting the forces of terror that threaten that peace. For nearly a year, the brave men and women of the IDF have been systematically crushing Hamas's terror army that once ruled Gaza. On October 7th, the day of that invasion into Israel, that terror army numbered nearly 40,000 terrorists. It was armed with more than 15,000 rockets. It had 350 miles of terror tunnels, an underground network bigger than the New York subway system, which they used to wreak havoc above and below ground. A year later, the IDF has killed or captured more than half of these terrorists, destroyed over 90% of their rocket arsenal, and eliminated the key segments of their terror tunnel network. In major military operations, we destroyed nearly all of Hamas's terror battalions, 23 out of 24 battalions. Now, to complete our victory, we are focused on mopping up Hamas's remaining fighting capabilities. We are taking out senior terrorist commanders and destroying remaining terrorist infrastructure. And we're working to bring it to an end. And the reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go. Israel will reject any role for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. We don't seek to resettle Gaza. What we seek is a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Only then can we ensure that this round of fighting will be the last round of fighting. Ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve total victory. There is no substitute for it. Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat, and that's exactly what we're doing.
The mainstream narratives that we hear from Israeli government is quite different from your thoughts. Could you elaborate more about the politics in Israel and why there are different stances about the issues related to Palestine and Israel conflict?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in politics, so it's important to understand that, but I can tell you something. Like in many places in the world, there's leaderships or prime ministers that do not reflect all public opinions. So for me, I would definitely say that I represent the opposition of what our leadership is leading today, the country and our prime minister. Even though it's democratic elections, in the last elections when Benjamin Netanyahu was actually elected, so I would say that it was basically 50-50 almost. So 50% of the public in Israel chose him, but 50%, like myself, were really against him. So I would say that the public is divided. And so even though our country is led now by, I would say, extreme right government, there are many people like me that they don't represent us. And I would say, especially at this situation, that in order to stay in power, the prime minister has to continue the war. And that's what brings him to be in power, because the moment the war will end, no one will choose him. Like everybody, there are so many people that are against what is going on. So for him to stay in power, he has to continue the war. And that's what's going on at this moment now.
Are you referring to the attacks in Lebanon when you say that?
I'm referring to both, because I feel it's also the war that is going on in Gaza from around October 8th.
Yes.
But I would say also Lebanon. So it doesn't really matter. It's the fact that we are now in an emergency state. Yes. Nothing can be done. We have to fight, for our life. And that's what's going on. I'm saying that, in terms of that's the voice that is talking now from the prime minister and from the government. But many people are against this.
It's good for us to get a better understanding and context, because we're in Taiwan, and as Ching said, we only get mainstream media narratives. And actually, on that note, I did want to ask an earlier question. Because of your international background, I was curious to find out, what are the mainstream narratives that are being said by Israelis about Palestinians? We did a little research, and the conflict, it's decades long, and there are so many different aspects to it. So growing up there, what would you say is the general narrative or view about Palestinians? Because we're not there.
Yeah. I would just say that in general, it's looking at them as the others, I would say. It's the other. And like they would say on us, I think there is an ongoing conflict from 1948 when the state of Israel was established. And there for a long, long time, there has been occupation going on in the Palestinian territories and negotiations that actually failed between Israelis and Palestinians to find a way that there would be some kind of, I would say, normal life going on. But many of these negotiations failed. I could say that for me, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who was assassinated in 1995, he was for me and for many others from, I would say the peace camp. That was like the hardest moment for us, because it was kind of like he was assassinated, but peace was assassinated as well. Because since then, nothing really went back to any kind of even desire to create some kind of peace talks. But I think, I don't want to go too much into the nitty-gritty of the politics because it's very complicated. I would just say that, there's Israel and there's Palestine, and Palestinians are in call for to get independence and their own state. And that is something that is going on for a long time. But in the daily, like my daughter, she goes to first grade school, and in her school her teachers are Arabs, and she also learns Arabic and also Hebrew, and there's places where there is kind of some kind of normal coexistence, and that's where I chose to live. But I would say that the mainstream and most of the people look at it, it's either us or them, I would say, that kind of concept.
Understood.
You talked about the film earlier, that you want to keep it more neutral. And so when you are making this film, how do you balance the perspective?
It's a good question, balancing. I started trying to say, how do I balance? But then I understood that the word balancing is actually stopping me from being able to do actually the film, because the word balancing creates a lot of
Ambiguity?
confusion and trying to find, it's not here, it's not there. Well, if we say this, we need to say that. A lot of confusion, a lot of complexity that is anyway very complex. So at some point, I think as a director, I decided to stick to the perspective of Dr. Abuelaish and to tell the story through his eyes. And that meant that any event or anything that takes place that is part of the bigger story, that is part of the social, political situation taking place, if it doesn't have any direct contact to him, I don't put it in the film, because it's too big to explain the whole history of the place and the different conflicts and so many wars. And so I decided to stick to that, and it meant that there's no real balance, because I decided to tell the story through his eyes. And I felt that as a filmmaker and from an ethical point of view of, creation, that would be the way I should go, because if not, there is no way out of it. One would say this and the other would answer that. We know that truth and reality really depends on who's actually looking at it. So for me, I put myself aside and I decided to look at it through the eyes of his life and the events that took place that had direct connection to that.
Mm-hmm.
When people watch your film, when they hear about Dr. Abuelaish's message and his story, what do you want people to think about when they leave the theater? And what actions do you hope that they do or that they will take moving forward?
So I think, first of all, what I wish for that people would be able to take the message into their own personal life and think about the way they think they know others or people or different conflicts, and understand that, beyond, these big conflict situations, there are actual people and civilians all over the world that are affected by what is going on. In Israel, I could say that, okay, Israel is occupying territories and it is the occupier, but it doesn't mean that all Israelis are representatives of our right-wing government. And we need to find a way to speak out, and I think that international assistance is very important in these situations. And I feel that people need to kind of still believe that beyond a lot of difficulties, if someone has a very strong, I would say, motivation to change, they should look at Dr. Abuelaish and try and, use the energy and divert it to positive acts. Because I feel that the whole media and everything that is going on always makes someone that they have to decide which side they are on, what do they believe in, this is okay, this is not okay. But I feel that it's basically understanding that we have our own navigator inside ourselves and we need to follow that, and also be aware of the effects of media, be aware of what images what kind of news we're consuming, and try and go beyond that, I would say.
This concludes our time for today. Join us again next week for more on Director Barda's cinematic career and her wisdom for those starting out in the film industry. This is Ching and Cho
And Mary Ann Shoko.
See you guys next week. Bye.
Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, SoundOn Podcast, Spotify, you name it, we're on it. You can find selected shows produced by RTI's English team on different streaming services. All you have to do is search for the show or type RTI. Find an episode you find interesting, hit play, and you'll learn more about Taiwan and its people.